And then you want to be aiming to pick the dry food with the least amount of carbohydrates. So that would be a really, really good start, because then you know they're not putting in all these fillers, and because your dog doesn't need to eat 60% sweet potato in their diet. That's not going to be the most ideal. We want to be aiming for a higher proportion of animal products and a lower proportion of plant products. When we're looking at a natural diet, some people do say about 10% plant material. I like to think a little bit more than that. 20 to 25% is fine. But when we're looking at a carbohydrate product, you'll see anything up to, a dry food product, you'll see anything up to 60% carbohydrate. You want to try to bring that below 50%.
Hello, humans and puggies. Welcome to the Pug Life Show, brought to you by Pug Parties, because your pug deserves to be the best dressed at the party. And you can check out the Pugs and Stripes collection at pugparties.com. I'm your host, Donna, and with me are my puggy co-hosts, Rosie and Kenji, with their rescue foster brother, Buster. Today, we're digging into a topic that affects every puggy every day. What the floof is in our puggies' food bowl. Because let's face it, when we feed our pugs, this has a huge impact on their health, their happiness, and those oh-so-charming snorts. We're talking about pug nutrition with a bonafide animal nutritionist, Jackie Gowland from Functional Canine. Not in a preachy or confusing way, but in a real practical, what do I actually put in the bowl kind of way. Whether you're serving up kibble, raw, cooked, or somewhere in between, this episode is all about how you can boost the nutritional value of what you're already using for your pug. We'll also be sharing some real-life examples from two of our resident taste testers. Rosie, who battles reflux, and Kenji, whose tummy can be as sensitive as a pug caught out in the rain. You'll hear how small food tweaks and a better understanding of ingredients can make a big difference for them. And I'm going to try it out and report back to you in a couple of months to let you know how they're going. But before we zoom into the conversation, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. You'll find the link in the show notes, so you can be the first to know when the next episode lands and get access to lots more pugtastic goodies. Hello, Jackie. Thank you so much for coming on the Pug Life Show. It is awesome to have you. It's pet pug nutrition. We'll just say pug nutrition, even though it's basically you cover all breeds or all animals, if I remember correctly. Talking about what the floof goes into a pug's food bowl, pretty much.
Thank you so much, Donna, for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, it's awesome. So it's a hotly contested conversation, for want of a better term, both online and at play groups around Australia and probably the world, which is what's the best food to give my pug? Because pug parents, we are a bit extravagant with our pugs. We love them probably too much, but there's still that thought of, I may be spending a ludicrous amount of money on whatever it is that I'm feeding my pug, but is it really the right thing that I should be giving them? So, and especially when everyone knows pugs can be a little bit on the chonky side at the best of times. We don't pug shame. They can be nicely rounded, and sometimes we just need to reduce them from a basketball down to a baseball or something along those lines. So it's awesome that you've agreed to come on the show. You are an animal nutritionist, which I'd only learned about a few weeks ago when I saw you on a different conversation. But before we jump into the bajillion questions that I have, tell us a little bit about yourself and your fur family.
So I guess I've been raised in a very natural and holistic lifestyle. My parents don't use a lot of chemicals within their household. But during my schooling, I went on a very scientific path. So when I completed my schooling year, I went into animal science, and I learned a lot about, I guess, the importance of numbers and studies and these types of things. Animal science is the back door into becoming a veterinarian. And I decided to not further my studies to become a veterinarian because I was like, oh, there's something here that I really need to be pursuing. And I don't need to go on and do those additional years to get into the medical profession. So I was on this scientific path, moved out of home, got my first dog. And again, coming from very natural roots, my family dog, never went to the vet. We never used flea products or worming tablets or anything like that. It was a very simple life, if that kind of makes sense. And my parents, I guess, not having a huge amount of funds, would just buy supermarket pet food, and that was it. My childhood dog didn't really it was a beautiful, happy dog, but she got diabetes at the age of 8 and passed away at the age of 9. And for me as a child, that was very heartbreaking, and that wasn't something that I wanted to happen to my dog. So I got my puppy, and I thought I'm going to, take her to the vet, twice a year for a checkup. She's going to be on everything that the vet recommends, monthly flea treatments, wormed every 3 months, the best possible dry food that I can get her. So I got this little fluffy I own border collies, got this little fluffy border collie puppy. And as soon as I started feeding her, she was itchy. And I was like, what's going on? This is the most expensive bag of dry food that
Yeah.
I think cost me $150 or something. I don't understand. She'd been fleed. I was like, I don't get it. Her skin was dry. She was very lifeless, listless, and was not a happy and healthy puppy.
Mm.
And these thoughts and ideas were all based on my scientific background. And then somebody mentioned to me, maybe it's the diet. Maybe there's something else going on.
Mm.
So I started exploring and dabbling food therapy and, reverting back to opting for natural options rather than going down the medical route. And, the vet only knows so much.
Absolutely.
They get taught a lot in medical school to do with the body and medications and medication interactions. Fun fact, the nutrition course within my university degree is the same that a veterinarian has in their undergrad degree as well.
Mm.
So unless a veterinarian goes on to do further nutritional studies, now this was, gosh, I graduated in 2013. So what's that, 13, 14 years ago. I don't know if things have changed since then. I don't think it really has. But I had the same nutritional knowledge through university as a veterinarian. And I found that it was so limiting and restrictive. And it was just about how many cups of dry food to feed or how to calculate the calories from this bag. And if a dog has renal failure, make sure you opt for this because the scientific studies say that this dry food is going to be the most appropriate.
Mm.
So I went down this path of food therapy, working with natural diets, working with whole foods, opting for raw foods. Now, don't get me wrong, these things aren't correct for all dogs,
Mm.
but I was exploring these things with my dog, and I ended up finding something that worked for her. And luckily, quite quickly, because she was a puppy, I got her at 9 weeks old.
Mm.
And you can't really be messing around with tweaking the diet and doing elimination diets when a puppy is
Mm.
8, 9 weeks old. So very quickly I managed to find what worked for her, and I was able to reduce the constant itching and scratching down from every 30 seconds to once a day. So it was within a manageable realm and considered what would be more normal, I guess you could say. Um,
Mm.
and she's 11 now, and she's very happy and healthy. And there's, we can all look back on our first dog or our first dog that has had something significantly different to what we were expecting. And there's things like, oh, I wish I didn't give her tennis balls because her teeth are n- not ideal. And that's something that a lot of people don't know, that if your
Mm.
dog, and I don't know if this is an issue with pugs, I don't know if they can get their little mouth around a
I
tennis
think
ball
if you can
very
get
well.
mini tennis balls, but not the big ones, no.
The tennis balls that you use to play tennis, there's a glue in there that corrodes a dog's teeth.
Oh,
So
wow.
so I've got 2 border collies, one that has chewed tennis balls for half her life and her teeth are worn down, and the other one has chewed bones, sticks, probably stones, and he has perfect teeth and he's 9.
Yeah.
Immaculate teeth, absolutely perfect. So, we can all look back and
Well,
think
first
there's
tip,
things.
no tennis balls, big or small.
Yeah, no tennis balls, and rubber balls are fine and stuff like that, but yeah,
Yeah.
no tennis balls, especially if your dog has a tendency to chew on them.
Can't wait to go
Um,
to playgroup on Sunday and tell everyone.
Interesting, isn't it? And
Yes.
things, people don't talk about, and I don't know why, or we're not aware of, or it only becomes a problem when it's a problem, and then you
Yes.
can't change it, you can't reverse that. So I went down this natural path with my
Mhm.
dog. I studied natural animal nutrition. I am certified to work with horses, cats, and small animals. However, I gravitate mostly towards dogs because that's where my experience is, and
Mhm.
cats because I do have a moderate amount of experience with looking after cats on a raw diet within my own care and through consultation. And to me, this has really, I guess, brought me back to my roots. I've got that scientific understanding and background, but it means I also understand, I guess, what happens behind the scenes
Mm.
within the scientific realm and what their knowledge and understanding is and why they behave in the way that they behave, why they recommend what they recommend, and where I guess their knowledge is capped and limited.
Mm. It's fascinating because I got onto the BARF diet about 5 or 6 years ago, as we were talking about before we hit record, because somebody, actually, I think it was my personal trainer, he had watched a movie called Pet Food, I think it is,
Yeah.
and it was talking about, admittedly, it's focused on the American pet food industry, but I could still see the parallels within Australia, even though I believe our laws around pet food are a lot more stringent than they are in the US. So some of the challenges they have over there we don't experience, just literally because we're a lot tougher. But the whole documentary was around kibble versus not dry foods, same thing. Sorry, kibble versus BARF diets and why there's not enough research in the benefits or otherwise in either. And in some instances, a lot of the research is actually paid for by the companies that are selling kibble. And that's so it makes it very difficult when a pug parent goes in and goes, I'm going to spend $150 on a bag of kibble because I grew up with my family, with the family pet dog that slept outside. And so they just got whatever kibble. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, this is like they're putting on weight, they're doing this, they're doing and that. And then all of a sudden you're just sort of like, or even worse, you walk into Pet Barn, for instance, and there are 4 aisles of kibble. Like, it's incredible the amount of food options there are. And it's no wonder that people are confused as to what's the best food to give their pug to make sure that they're sort of happy and healthy, which kind of leads into my first big question. Like, give us the rundown of dry versus wet versus BARF. Like, and for those who don't know what BARF actually, it's an acronym. It stands for biologically appropriate raw food, but we'll continue to refer to it as BARF just because otherwise it's going to take forever to get through the episode. So what are the main differences, sort of pros cons between the three?
I'll just backtrack a little. You mentioned, what's the best thing to feed my dog? And it's kind of like saying, what's the best thing for me to eat? What's the best thing for you to eat? I might advocate a vegan diet. You might advocate a carnivore diet. We both might say we're super healthy and that it's changed our lives, but what's the best thing? Like, they can't both be correct, can they?
Yes.
And it's like the best thing for your dog is to work with the dog that's in front of you. But if we take one step back from specifically just what your dog needs, if we think about our health as human beings, generally speaking, the best thing for us to eat would be something that contains as many whole foods as possible that work well within our body. Now, whether that's biologically appropriate or whether it's individualized to our specific digestive system, it's entirely up to you how you need to feel into that because everyone will have a different response to different foods. So so we're so we're looking at things from an aspect of what works for the dog in front of you, plus what is going to have the most whole foods without being destructive to the digestive system. And that would be determined by how the puppy was raised. Now, this might not be how you raised the puppy. This might be what happened when the puppy was born. If they were on medication at a very young age, if something had happened, if they got sufficient colostrum from their mother. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
there's all these little things that we need to take into account before they even, end up in your lap and you take them home.
Mm.
So we've got all these different types of food to feed our dog, and it is overwhelming and it is confusing. But if you think about it from the very simple perspective of the whole foods that are going to be the most appropriate for my dog, how can I incorporate as much of that as possible in the diet? Or can the entire diet be made of whole foods that work best for my dog's system? When we look at biologically appropriate raw food, or sometimes it's also referred to as bones and raw food. I think
Mhm.
that's the original
Yes.
Dr. Billinghurst. And both are correct. Both are
Mm.
absolutely correct. But the original Dr. Billinghurst ethos behind that is that bones are an essential, important evolutionary part of for what dogs need to be happy and healthy, nutritionally, mentally, physically, all these types of things. So if we're looking at it from this aspect of a evolutionary standpoint,
Mhm.
then we'd be thinking about feeding high quality animal products that are minimally processed. That's the thing that I did forget to mention. Thinking about like gravitating towards whole foods and foods that are, appropriate for the dog that's in front of you, but also minimizing the amount of processed foods within the diet.
Mm.
So so we're thinking animal products because if you and a pug, it's so hard to think that a pug may have
They would
once
be
been a
chasing
wolf.
down an elk. Yes, in the
It's
forest.
just such a far stretch, but genetically somewhere somewhere in this beautiful little creature, there are genetics that mirror what's similar to a wolf.
Yeah.
And animal products are where their digestive system best handles nutrients.
Mm.
It like if you give a vegetable source of omega-3 like a flaxseed, chia seeds, hemp seeds have a source of omega-3 in them too, compared to a fish-based source of omega-3, an animal product source of omega-3, they're going to uptake almost all of the animal omega-3 in comparison to about 10% of the plant-based omega-3. So their body is designed to utilize animal-based nutrients.
Mhm.
Now, does this mean that you're going to throw a whole chicken out on your lawn and let your pug eat that every day? Not necessarily. That might not be quite right for your dog. Like, we don't have to step back into this, I guess,
Dog
cave,
eat dog, dog
caveman.
eat
Yeah,
cave.
it doesn't be like that because we're working with the dog that's in front of us. Now, I have mentioned that, we have these genetics from wolves. However, there is scientific studies to suggest that over the 2000 or so years that dogs have been by our side, that their genetics have modified and altered to be able to digest starch a little bit better than what their wolf cousins are able to.
Mm.
So I think wolves only have 2 genes for digesting starch within their gut, whereas domesticated dogs have I think about 30 genes, something like this. I'm probably quoting think of it as a rough ballpark.
It's a
This
lot.
is
Yeah,
from memory.
it's a big difference.
They've got genes to digest starch within their gut, and they have a small amount of salivary amylase, not as much as what we do,
Mm.
but it's, their genetics has changed to, I guess, cater more towards the human sort of style diet because they've been living alongside us for those couple thousand
Mm.
years. Now, that means that we don't just have to stick to animal-based products to nourish our dogs. We can look at whole foods like appropriately cooked or fermented if fermented works for your dog. Vegetables, little fruits and berries, again, that are dog safe. When you start, I guess, exploring these different types of diets and evolutionary diets, some people will question as to whether grains are appropriate. And there's a lot of questions around that, I think, because the grains in dry food are not healthy.
Mm.
But if you're cooking, healthy grains within your kitchen that are appropriate for your dog, they can have prebiotic benefits and feed their gut microbiome. If your dog is, say a 12-year-old pug and it has been fed dry food all its life, giving them just raw meat probably isn't what their body is ready for.
Gonna-
So you want to give them something that is, slowly cooked and partly broken down and maybe has some of those beautiful carbohydrates in them to help nourish and nurture their microbiome to kind of bring them out of that heavily processed dry food stage into something a little bit more nourishing and natural and whole food. And again, looking at what works with your dog specifically. So I don't know if that, I guess, covers what you wanted to know about, I guess, the raw food side of things. Does that help?
Yep, that's
Yeah.
great. It's
Yeah.
so
If
sort of wet is kind of in the middle. I've never been a huge fan of wet food, but how does that kind of factor into the variety?
Well, I think wet food and dry food are both heavily processed or highly
Mm,
processed, and then within dry food, there's air dried and freeze dried, and they all cover different sorts of benchmarks. But if we just look at standard kibble or dry food and a standard canned food, you could argue that potentially the canned food is better because there's a nutrient in canned food that is completely missing in wet food, and that's water.
mm,
Now, we don't really think of water as a nutrient, but it is. And if you're giving your dog a dry, dehydrated diet all the time, their body is going to become dry and dehydrated. Dogs aren't meant to go to their water bowl every 5 minutes. They're not supposed to do that. They're meant to obtain their moisture from food. Again, think about wolves, think about things in an
mm,
ancestral aspect. They're eating highly, the animal products are about 80% water. So they're eating these hydrated foods that are hydrating their body. Now, if you're giving them a dehydrated product, you're taking the water out of their body and they're trying to, do you know what I mean? They're trying to digest
yeah,
it,
they're
and it
taking
puts
taking
pressure
water
on
out
their,
to kinda then rehydrate it in their gut to then be able to
yeah.
process it.
Yeah, so it puts pressure on their kidneys and things like that, and it's not the most ideal. Now, there's a lot of marketing around the dental benefits of dry food. I guess that's like
Mm.
me saying to you, if you chew on some crackers, it's going to be good for your teeth. Now, that's questionable, plausible, but questionable. So I think a lot of the, I guess, judgment towards wet food is based on that.
Mhm.
In saying that, wet food and dry food do still have similar proportions of carbohydrates, and those carbohydrates are going to stick to the teeth. They are going to alter the oral microbiome in a negative sense, and it's going to cause issues in the mouth. So we just need to be mindful of these types of things. So wet food, I'm so with. There's human grade versions of wet food where they use only human grade meat. And then we're stepping away from that stuff that you were talking about, where in the US, I
It was
think that
horrendous. There were dogs that were dying, and they were tracing it back to the fact that the food that was like it was sounds I'm gonna be a little bit emotive. They were scraping stuff off the floor and putting it into the dog food, and they were then dying from the pesticides that were and
yeah,
I was
well,
horrified.
there's a lot of things that happen in the US, and some of those things happen in Australia. We are a little bit more stringent around where the meat comes from. So in the US, you're allowed to use euthanized animals in your pet food.
Mhm.
Now, a euthanized animal is still going to have that euthanasia chemical in their meat,
Mm.
and that's going into pet food, and that has killed dogs. That has definitely killed dogs. You're allowed to use roadkill, dying or diseased animals. So there's a it's in the US it's a little bit iffy. Here in Australia they're not meant to be, they can't be euthanized, and they're not meant to be, roadkill or diseased or dying or anything like that. But I don't really know who is regulating this. And when it's in a, so I don't know how much you know about dry food and canned food. They go through this process called extrusion, which is basically they put whatever it is that they want to include as the protein component into this big vat, and they heat it at an extremely high temperature, and it turns it into this slurry, into this mush. Think about, I guess, hot dogs or chicken nuggets getting made.
Oh, g which I don't eat.
So
So
they turn it into this slurry, so
Oh.
you could put, I think Dr. Judy Morgan said she made it's theoretically made what could have been labeled as a dog food from boot leather and something else and a mineral supplement.
Oh,
So they put whatever it is that they include as protein. Now, if you're going through human grade sources, then you're more likely to be guaranteed higher grade quality of
mhm,
protein. I'm not saying that pet grade is not going to be high grade, but it just means that you need to research the company and make sure they're reputable. They
mm,
put it in this big vat, cook it at an extremely high temperature so any bacteria is killed off, any mold, or do you know what, anything that we
It's
don't really want
kind of
to
we're
know.
killing the harmful stuff, but I believe we're also killing
But
the
it's
good
all kind
stuff.
of getting yeah. It's getting turned into this mushy slurry that doesn't really have any nutritional content, and then they go, "Okay, well, we've just taken all the nutrients out, but there's still kind of some protein in there. We'll chuck this vitamin and mineral mix in." And then they also do the same with the carbohydrate content. So dry food tends to be probably between 20 and 30, up to 40%, no more than 40%, like animal product, and then the rest is carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And it'll appear different on the packaging because on the packaging, it'll say, as the first ingredient might say chicken breast or
Mm.
something like that. Now, that doesn't mean that there's actually more
Actually,
chicken breast than there is
no.
grains
Yeah.
because weighing the wet chicken breast, which has 80% moisture. So once you take out that 80%
Extrude
moisture
it all. Mm.
through this process, then there actually ends up being significantly less chicken than what you originally imagined or intended. So they're extruding the meat, they're extruding the grain component, and the grain component can be from anywhere. It can be from, factories or sweepings off of, like, that could be
Mhm.
from any sort of industry, whatever they feel is going to, I guess, take up the space. And yes, some companies would be using quality grains, or
Mm.
human grade grains, or something that is good, but then there would be other companies that wouldn't be.
Mm.
Often they can also put in things like gluten meal, which increases the protein content reading on the labeling, but it's not good. Where does gluten meal come from? It would come from this industrial process as a
Carbohydrate.
byproduct. So
Mm.
we need to be anything that's processed, even for human food. We don't really know what is in it or where these things are coming from because it's been pressed and compressed and refined and the hot dog slurry. And it's been pressed into these little pellets or put in this little can, and then it's got pretty pictures painted on it. It might say organic because maybe something was from organic origin. And you mentioned glyphosate. Now, glyphosate is going to be on anything that has grains that has had glyphosate sprayed on them. So that could be human grade grains from a farm in Australia that might use glyphosate. It could be from, a place in America that's not doing things correctly. So we just need to be very, very mindful that it could happen anywhere and it could happen with anything. And you just
So
need to know and understand the company and not be afraid to ask questions. And if they can't answer your questions, you should probably look at going somewhere else.
mm. So glyphosate in layman's terms?
Glyphosate is a pesticide that they use in farming. It's banned in the EU and a few companies across South America. It's not banned in the US. And I don't think it's banned in Australia yet. I'll have to check up on that one.
Mm.
But it's a known carcinogen. It wasn't recognized as a carcinogen because it's been used for a very long time, like
Mm.
75 plus years or something. Originally, it was created as an antibiotic, and then they realized it could be used as a pesticide. And the reason why they use glyphosate is because if you spray it on your wheat before it's harvested, it like dries it out and it ripens it just that little bit more. So it kind of makes the harvesting process easier. But it's a known carcinogen and it causes, it without going to the stage of saying it's causing cancer in the body,
Mm.
it's as it originally was an antibiotic, it disrupts the gut microbiome. So you're like sanitizing your insides,
The
which isn't what we want to be doing.
No, and it horrifies you when you start to, I suppose, peel back the label and then have a look at how these things are made. That's like watching this movie. My partner and I sort of sat there and I think we were probably a bit gobsmacked at some of the things that they showed as to how, and they were talking about big name brands which are also on the shelves in Australia. And admittedly, the movie was made before COVID, so things may have changed since then. But it definitely was an eye-opening experience for us where we just went, maybe we need to rethink. But then sort of one, because at the end of the movie it says, we don't have all the answers. We're just telling you what we've found so far, which I thought was great. There was no kind of finger pointing one or the other. But what they did say at the end, which is what you're also saying, is look at the nutrition panel, ask the questions, and then of course my next question was, shit, I look at the nutrition panel, like I look at the nutrition panel on the back of a packet of chips for crying out loud, and I go, oh, there's potato in it, awesome. I don't know what all these other things are. And that's sort of, I think, where people get a little bit confused. So sort of rolling into sort of the next question is the nutrients. This is the important thing. So on the label, if someone goes, look, I can't afford BARF mints, and I get it. I mean, even like a food, it's very expensive. Not everyone can afford to buy freshly made meals, or they don't have the time to do it because they can do it themselves. What should they be looking for on the back of a label to say, this looks a little bit more trustworthy than this sort of under-marketed brand looks more trustworthy than the marketed brand, which has all the big shiny bells and whistles at the front of the store?
Yeah, or the veterinary prescription diet or the,
Yes.
veterinarian advocated, celebrity vet advocated. Yeah,
Mm.
you do have to be very mindful. And it's not the front of the pack and the pretty pictures that we're looking at, because I can guarantee the carrots and these beautiful vegetables and fresh meat that you're seeing did not look like that when it went in. So
Mm.
it's
So
it's not accurate to what you're actually feeding your dog. On the
So
back of the
what's
packet.
the good stuff? We'll go for the positive stuff first. What's the good stuff we should be looking for on a label?
Yeah. So we want to look at the ingredients and we want to look at the nutritional panel. Now, I mentioned before that when they put meat in it, it still has water content. So they list it as the first ingredient. However, that water content obviously disappears through the extrusion process. So there's not actually as much protein as you would have originally, I guess, visualized. So if you want to calculate the protein content, there's a really good little calculator that Rodney Habib has made, and you can Google it. Just Google Rodney Habib dry food protein calculator, and there's little images.
It's in your handout as well, isn't it? Oh, no, that one was for the
I believe
carbohydrate.
it probably is. Yeah. And it's basically a calculation where you remove the water content from what was put into the
In the
mix.
panel, yeah.
And it can tell you exactly how many carbohydrates is in there. And then you want to be aiming to pick the dry food with the least amount of carbohydrates. So that would be a really, really good start, because then they're not putting in all these fillers, and because your dog doesn't need to eat 60% sweet potato in their diet. That's not going to be the most ideal.
Mm.
We want to be aiming for a higher proportion of animal products and a lower proportion of plant products. When we're looking at a natural diet, some people do say about 10% plant material. I like to think a little bit more than that. 20 to 25% is fine. Um, but when we're looking at a carbohydrate product, you'll see anything up to, a dry food product, you'll see anything up to 60% carbohydrate. You want to
Gosh.
try to bring that below 50%. That's
Wow.
what we're looking for. So that's the nutrition panel side of things, doing that little quick calculation. When it comes to the ingredients, first thing you want to look for is ingredients that are familiar to you. If it says meal or rendered or a byproduct, if it's a word that you don't understand, if it has more than 10
Really long.
yeah, yeah. If it's extremely long, then you need to start thinking, is this synthetic? And what exactly is it? Is it a synthetic version of vitamin E? Is it a synthetic preservative? Is it a synthetic B12 that is actually not healthy and not safe? So we're sort of looking at things in that aspect. So looking for word recognition, avoiding meals, anything like I said, the wheat gluten sort of thing. We want to be avoiding those types of things. Looking for what we would consider more species appropriate food. So avoiding corn, avoiding wheat. Now, these types of things are quite common in our prescription diets. They're still using a lot of corn and maize as a base for their products. And where they get that from can also be genetically modified. Corn also has a tendency to grow a lot of mold on it. So it's another thing that we need to be thinking about is, are the products within the food, are they prone to growing mold? Were they growing mold on them before they were processed and put into that little slurry? And are those mold spores going to be, growing in the bag? Or when it's exposed to air, is there going to be mold that's going to grow on the food if it's been open for longer than a week? So we just need to be quite mindful of all of these sorts of things.
Mm.
So we've done the nutrition panel, we've worked out how many carbs is in it, we're reducing the carbs. We've looked at the ingredients, seen what we can recognize as food. And then we're aiming to have more animal-derived nutrients, if possible, rather than plant-derived nutrients, and seeing if they can use natural sources rather than synthetic sources. A lot of companies will just pour in a premix vitamin and mineral, which basically makes that boot leather in alignment with AFCO standards. Um,
Just
but
horrifies
then there are other companies that won't be doing that. They'll be using, wheatgrass powder, which is extremely nutritious. I guess it would be questionable as to what stage they put it in, if it is still nutritious, if it's at the beginning where it's a slurry. But
me.
that's when you start looking into things more like freeze-dried dog food, where a lot of these nutrients are retained, and we're not losing these things through the cooking process, or air dried, which I believe is dried below 100 degrees Celsius for a couple days. So there's things that we can look at and aim for, and it's a sliding scale of what's within your budget, what's going to work for your dog, what's familiar to you, what you can access within your area. We don't all have a pet barn down the road.
No,
So yeah, there's lots of different things you can look at, but
those are
trusting your
the
common
basics.
sense, yeah, but trusting your common sense is the most sensical way to move forward.
Mhm. No, that's spectacular. Thank you. It was because you have this great handout which is available on your website, and I have included it in the show notes so everybody can get access to it. So some of the things you were just talking about are in that great that great handout. Um, but one of the things I did learn in this handout was putting your kibble in the fridge. This was so that just blew my mind. Like I literally, my partner got home and and I said to him, "We need to make room in the fridge. The kibble's got to go in there." And thankfully, we buy smaller bags. Because the puppies have all upset tummies, so we do actually, and we will hopefully get to it. They use a vet prescribed special microbiome kibble for one of their meals to sort of help them. And I said to him, "We need to be putting this in the fridge." And even he looked at me and said, "What?" Like it was so foreign. It was almost like I told him I had to put his coffee beans in the fridge, which apparently is now a no-no. So I know. So tell us the science behind why we should actually be putting the kibble in the fridge once the bag's open.
Well, if you think about it, we've got this food product that was made from fresh foods. So it was made from, meat and vegetables, et cetera, some grains, and we've made it into that slurry to make it shelf stable. Now, realistically, how long can we make something that was fresh and natural and that would only last in your fridge for 2 or 3 days? How long can we realistically make that shelf stable for? So there's the whole food component, and then there's the additional nutrient component that they add in. The B vitamins, within that mineral mix. Some kibbles have fish oil added, and we'll look at that and we'll go, "Oh, yay, fish oil. That's, an omega-3 and it's really good for my dog." But fish oil, when we have it as humans, it's in a capsule, and most people store it in the fridge so that it doesn't go rancid. When you're spraying fish oil on the outside of kibble to make it nice and tasty, and then you're putting it in a bag and it's sitting on the shelf in a pet food shop, and the sun comes in through the window, and then you take the bag home and you open it, how good is that fish oil? It's probably not as good as it was
Yeah.
when it was, before it was sprayed on the kibble and gone through the cooking process and things like that. So the nutrients within this, because it was originally a whole food product, they do become rancid. They do change, they do oxidize, it does disappear when exposed to temperature and when exposed to oxygen. And gone are the days of us, buying well, you wouldn't buy a 20-kilo bag of dog food for your pug. The
They would
equiv
happily sleep with it.
But gone are the days where we're buying a 20-kilo bag of dog food and we're pouring it into this PVC bin that we got for
Out the back.
free.
Yeah.
Yeah, out the back and keeping it in the garage. Because that plastic's gonna be transferring into the food, and it's gonna be sitting in the garage for 3 months. If you've got a pug, probably a year. Do you
Yes.
know what I mean? Like, it's not healthy. It's not healthy.
Mm.
So, if dry food is what we choose to be feeding our dog for whatever reason, totally
Mhm.
cool. we want to be buying smaller bags, so we're going through it quicker. And we want to be sealing them so they're airtight, and that might be keeping it in the bag. And then, when you have a bag of chips, you roll it up and put a peg on it to keep
Yep.
them. Think the same sort of thing for your dog food, and then pop it in the fridge. And then that way, you're going to slow down the degradation of the B vitamins, of the, if there's fish oil added or any sort of polyunsaturated fat that's been added, you're going to slow down the oxidization process. You're going to stop these things going rancid quite as quick. So if you're treating your dry food as though it's a fresh food, you're going to be benefiting your dog.
Which is, as I said, just incredible, and is my job to now find a way to make it fit into the fridge. But you also mentioned the plastic bin, which was the other thing that really surprised me. We leave it in the bag because they're only small bags, because they're ludicrously expensive too. But yeah, so putting kibble into, if it's even a BPA free plastic container, is actually not great.
Yeah. Well, it's still made of plastic, and plastic is, made through it's like a byproduct of oil. If that makes sense. Like, it's not
Yes.
made from
Yes.
things that we really
Chemicals.
want to
Yep.
be ingesting. And, it's a good opportunity for you to start, I guess, looking at how you store your own food. The plastic is going to be transferring slowly over time into whatever product it is. And if it's been heated, for example, microwaved or left in the sun, left in the garage,
Yeah.
then it's going to transfer over a lot quicker. Yeah, BPA free, cool. That's really good. Like, behind me, I've got some spring water in a BPA free bottle, but I make sure that I go through that spring water as quick as possible, so it's not sitting in plastic in a warm environment for an extended period of time. So obviously do what's within your means, but there's no need to be taking the dry food out of the bag and putting it into a plastic bucket, because you can just make it airtight and store it in the fridge, and it'll solve 99% of your problems. So
Yeah, just to really, blew my mind. I love it when I read something and go, oh my God, so I had to share that, because everybody will obviously read your a handout, so they'll already know, but that's fine. It was absolutely incredible. So the next thing I want to talk about is, because we'll focus on kibble. BARF is one thing, but sort of most people get kibble. So they've now realised that their 20-kilo bag of pug food that they've got stashed out the back in the garage, maybe they need to start feeding all the dogs in the street for a couple of weeks to get it down.
yeah,
But if someone was now going, oh my God, like, kibble is more convenient for me for whatever the reason or anything else, but they want to try and improve the nutritional content of the bowl, how can they do that without obviously throwing out good food? What are some of the things that they can do to make the bowl a bit better?
yeah, of course. So again, I guess I've mentioned a couple of these things
Mm.
that are missing, like water, and a couple of these things that degrade over time, like the omegas, the B vitamins. So if you want to look at, first of all, buying a dry food that does not have fish oil added or omega-3s added, and then adding that in yourself through natural sources like sardines, or if you're having salmon for dinner tonight, you can cut a little bit of the salmon off. Raw is fine. If your dog
Lucky
tolerates
pugs.
raw, it can be cooked. Yeah,
Yep.
spoil your dog a little bit. The food that you eat, most of it is okay for your dog. We all know the list of no grapes, no macadamia nuts, no chocolate, those types of things. It's really simple to Google. Garlic is questionable. Don't necessarily think that garlic is not safe for your dog. But if you don't want to give that to your dog, not a problem. Onion's not okay. So we all know the things that our dog can't have, and obviously synthetic sauces, and you don't want to be giving him honey soy chicken on a regular basis with all the MSG and flavor enhancers, and it's not and it's probably not real honey. So you know what I mean? We don't want that.
Mm.
But people food, human food, your steamed or like gently pan fried Atlantic salmon fillet that you were going to have for yourself, especially if it's a wild caught one, if that was within your budget. A little slither of that added to your dog's bowl is going to be very, very, very good for him or her.
Mm.
So omega-3s is something that you can add, because that's not in there. I guess a source of hydration. Some people soak their dog's kibble throughout the day and will leave it
Mm.
out. We don't really want to be doing that, because there's a high content of carbohydrates, and these begin to go through a fermentation process, can start breeding bacteria If you're choosing to soak your dog's kibble to add a little bit more water back into it, please soak it in the fridge overnight. And probably avoid using boiling water. Just use like warm water or cold water, filtered water or spring water, because there's a lot of nasty bin tap water. You're obviously in Victoria, I'm in Adelaide. We have some of the worst tap water in Australia, probably also the Southern Hemisphere in Adelaide. So avoiding that and opting, and same with their water bowl. Like if you have filtered water in your house, or if you have spring water in your house, give it to your dog. If you're drinking it yourself, give it to your dog.
Yep.
It's going to be so much better for them. So adding a bit of a source of hydration, that might also be from, some steamed pumpkin or steamed mashed broccoli, something like that. Adding little blueberries on top. Puppies love blueberries. That sort of stuff.
My raspberries for my lot.
Yeah.
They eat them off our vine. I get none for Christmas because they get to them first.
And that says something, because these dogs, these beautiful pugs with their little inner wolf, their inner wolf is saying,
They're out foraging.
they're foraging, and they're saying, I need something, I want more vitamin C in my diet, or I want more antioxidants. Do you know what I mean? They're seeking that out, and you have this lovely raspberry bush in your backyard. And so they're going and they're foraging, and they're self-medicating and self-soothing using nature. It's the same sort of thing when your dog's eating grass. If it's eating grass like it's a cow, then you need to start asking questions. What's missing
What's wrong
in
with
my
your
dog's
tummy?
body? Yeah, what is going on? What's there that's not meant to be there? Or what's missing that should be there that's telling my dog to eat more grass and eat more grass and eat more vegetation and things like that.
What
But
is
little
the answer? That is actually a great point. What is the answer if they're eating grass?
I think there's no real true one concrete answer, but there's a set of questions that I like to ask myself. One is, are they getting enough enzymes in their diet? Now, enzymes naturally occur in raw foods. So if they're being fed a raw diet and they're eating a lot of grass, you probably might need to add some digestive enzymes to their food. If they're eating a processed diet, a kibble, can, something like that, and they're eating a lot of grass, they probably want you to add more fresh foods to that diet, if that makes sense. So is it enzyme based? Is it parasite based? Are they trying to cleanse their gut? So do you need to do some kind of, whether that be natural or pharmaceutical, like deworm parasite cleanse? Keeping that in mind. Is it a fiber based thing? You might have a pug where you've been feeding it an entirely animal based diet its whole life, where it's just been fed meat and bones and fish and eggs, as an example. Now, that dog might need more than that. So it might be seeking fiber and prebiotics. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's lots of questions that we can be asking, but it is the dog's body talking. It is suggesting something.
So
for sure.
the grass eating is kind of like the sign that you need to. It's not an automatic, this is what's wrong. It is, the pug is basically trying to communicate to you, yeah, something's not right with my gut. We need to figure this out.
Yeah. And a little, my dogs might wake up in the morning, and if I haven't fed them within a certain number of hours, they might nibble on the, because it's winter where we are, nibble on the fresh winter sprigs of grass that have popped up and sample on the little morsels of them. Now, something like that is okay. But if they're, like I said, eating grass like they're a cow, but they're not a cow, we have descended from wolves, not cattle. Their body can't digest that. So there's something that they're doing. There's a reason. I believe the section of a science is zoopharmacognosy or something like that. I can't pronounce it.
Wow, what a hell of a name.
But it's a whole study on how animals self-medicate using their environment and using food and using herbs and using berries and those types of things. So it's worthwhile paying attention to. It doesn't mean you need to rush your dog to the vet, but it's worthwhile paying attention to, noticing how often it happens, and then thinking about what could possibly be going on within your dog's body. Is something that's there that shouldn't be there, or what's missing within the diet, and that can help add that enzyme or, microbe that's meant to be in their body that's not. So
that's incredible. I have to admit, none of these guys do, but one of my past pugs, Winston, who was a terror, he was a horrendous grass muncher. And at the time, I mean, this was almost 15 years ago. So at the time, the thinking was, no, they've just got an upset tummy. Whereas now, obviously, we're like, that's not technically incorrect, but it's an upset tummy that we didn't actually really do anything about. So, and he was on a rather expensive kibble. So maybe what I should have been doing. But my father was notorious for giving the puppies bacon bones. That was there. And I just mean, Dad, the amount of salt, they loved them. Oh my God. Like, great for their teeth, really bad with all that salt. So these ones don't get bacon bones anymore. We've learnt that lesson the hard way.
Yeah, or anything else that it's preserved with, and, technically, because it's a smoked bone, how
Mm,
close is that to being a cooked bone? And it is quite general knowledge now not to give your dog cooked bones, so there's a lot of, and what if there's nitrates in it? There's a lot of things where,
mm.
these days we'd be shaking our head, but back in the day, it would have been a very common thing, The dog
Oh,
that slept outside was thrown any sort of veggie and table scrap, which wasn't the worst thing in the world because arguably some of them were probably getting better nutrition than our pampered pooches that we have these days.
yes.
However, there were a lot of things that were still missing in that and that we were probably giving that we maybe shouldn't have been giving.
Mm. No, I mean, I grew up with hunting dogs, so they got to eat wallaby and wallaby tails and they still did get kibble as well, but it was actually I have to admit these guys, my dad doesn't do it anymore, but my last pugs also got wallaby mints whenever Dad come over, and it was just looking at them, it was like Christmas and all of their bark days had come at once, and we went away, a complete segue, but I think you'll find this incredibly entertaining. We went away for a holiday a few years ago, and Dad come over and looked after Winston and Charles, and I had the list, they get this in the morning, they get this in the afternoon, and they get a couple of treats when you take them out for a walk or whatever else. We were away for 3 weeks. I come back and both of them put a kilo on each. And my dad's hunting dogs were fit and, they were great looking dogs. They were well looked after. And so I'm looking at Winston and Charles going, how? How could they have put on a kilo? Like, we were only gone for 3 weeks. And my mum pulled me aside and went, they got a wallaby patty every afternoon. And I'm like, on top of and she's like, yes. And I'm like, okay. Like, I thought, oh my God. It just, how quickly, even though there's nothing wrong with a wallaby patty by any stretch of the imagination, just how quickly they chonked on in 3 weeks by just getting that one bit of extra every day. But to Dad, that was how he showed them love. He took me forever to get that weight off the little.
Yeah, it can be quite difficult to budge the weight on pugs, and it's beautiful that he done that. Like, that's some lovely, beautiful, fresh food. However, there was no calorie management, and when there's no
What
calorie management,
a
we are going to run into problems like this. It would have been better if there was, a small portion of the bowl taken out,
yeah.
25%, and then a portion of fresh food added in. And some of that could have absolutely been that beautiful, fresh wallaby mince. That wouldn't have been a problem. And then you wouldn't have had chunky pugs. Being on a dry food diet as well, when there is a source of, like a significant source of carbohydrates, like I was saying, some dry foods can be 60% carbs.
That's amazing.
It can be difficult for a dog to maintain their insulin and their blood sugar. So when we're having these blood sugar spikes from the high carbohydrates, then we have the insulin spikes. And when we have elevated insulin, we can't lose weight. So
Mm,
this is going to perpetually cause a problem. And that's, we haven't really touched on this yet, but I think you might have mentioned something about weight earlier.
yes.
When we have these dry food weight loss diets that are significantly low in fat and low in calories, where we're still feeding a high amount of carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates might have less calories per 100 grams or whatever than fat, but fat is a nourishing nutrient that our cells need, that our body needs, that our skin needs, and things like that. It can have, if it's the right fats, it can have antioxidant like potential and things like that within the body. It's very important. Whereas carbohydrates, yes, they're a source of energy, but are they a dog's preferred source of energy? Is it what your dog should be using as a source of energy? Maybe they might be better using fat as a source of energy, and us just controlling the calories in total and removing all those carbohydrates. And then we might see a better weight loss journey. And I know with pugs, it can be very difficult for them to lose
Mm.
weight. And it's sad that we have this image these days of, oh, look at the cute, chonky puppy. Like, it doesn't mean that it's not
It-
cute. It certainly is cute, but it's also very unhealthy. And
mm.
and excess weight in any animal, human beings, dogs, is going to lead us down the path of chronic disease because it's a response of inflammation in the body. And we want to be avoiding that as much as possible.
No, I agree. And I have to admit, since having these guys on a mainly BARF diet, I do find managing their weight, it's a lot easier. I was sort of saying offline beforehand, like I have friends who say I'm following exactly what it says on the panel by kilo, how much they're meant to be getting every day, and they're still putting on weight or I'm not getting the weight off. And so it's in the next person who says that to me and I say to them, what's the carbohydrate level in, because that's obviously the key difference, because God knows I've done it myself. I've been scratching my head going, it says I feed them a cup of kibble per day and I'll spread that over 2 meals and it's having no effect. I tell you, I'm going to go back and have a look at the nutrition panel even though at the moment the puppies are on a vet prescribed diet because I've had upset tummies of late. So, but I would be very intrigued to see what's on the panel. But following into that, because hopefully I did want to I'm using Rosie and Kenji as guinea pigs. So as a sort of a way, because I'm sure people are going, wow, there's so much information we've talked about. It's all been wonderful. How might it apply for a real life example? So Rosie is slightly more complicated, but I'll go with Kenji because he's a little bit simpler. And it also seems to be common where pugs seem to have sensitive tummies. So he was a rescue. So he's come from another family via pug rescue. He's now 9, and the advice that we got when he first come to us was that he has a sensitive tummy, which ends up basically being it makes it difficult for him to poop. I will add that he has hip dysplasia, lactating patellas, and a faulty spine. So he's had surgery on his spine. So he does have other physical challenges. But the advice was he should only eat white meat. So, but he gets half a brick of chicken BARF in the morning, and there are some foresight pellets for his arthritis in that. In the afternoon, he gets I've just realised on my notes it says flotation and not floxetine. He gets his tablets surrounded by a little bit of peanut butter, and I make sure, because I have heard about the changes to peanut butter of lately where they're taking out sugar and putting in
Xylitol.
xylitol, yes.
Shame.
And at the moment, he's of an evening, he's getting about a half a cup of I won't say what brand. I'll just say it's vet prescribed microbiome kibble to sort of help with his tummy. And I have noticed um, that things have been a little bit better, but other than the fact that the kibble is really expensive, I also know that they're vet prescribed kibble. They're not meant to be on it for long periods of time. It's meant to be to sort of deal with the immediate issue, and then they're meant to go back to a more stable diet. So, um, for a pug that has a sensitive tummy, um, and let's just say he's on normal kibble, but what are some of the other things that I can be adding to sort of help his tummy behave every day?
Yeah, of course. I'd probably be, first of all, looking at why his tummy is so sensitive and what sorts of foods that it's reacting to. Is it reacting to certain types of protein? Is it reacting to certain levels of fat within the food? Those types of things. Often, I did bring up digestive enzymes before. Often, digestive enzymes are very, very helpful. Now, when we're feeding a dry food diet, we can talk about adding all these really beautiful supplements, but you can't really out supplement a poor diet. So, if you want to get the absolute best results, you want to work on the foundation, the diet. You want to make sure that that's as clean as possible. And then we're adding in all these other beautiful things that help the body work better and add nutrients and those types of things. So I would probably be looking at a digestive enzyme. That would be my first thoughts because something's obviously going on that's stopping him from, I guess, working with the food correctly.
Mm.
Potentially, there might be something going on with his microbiome. Now, this doesn't always mean that you have to add a probiotic. If you do choose to add a probiotic, and if that does work for your dog, and for a dog that tends to sort of lean to the more constipated, compacted side rather than diarrhea side, I do find that a probiotic can be helpful because you need the good bacteria to promote intestinal motility.
Mm.
And intestinal motility is what moves things along. If you don't have that motility, then things kind of slow down and get backed up and that sort of stuff. And obviously other things play a factor like fiber content and exercise and those types of things. But if we're just focusing on diet alone, a probiotic might be helpful for him. And you do need to be mindful of what type of probiotic that is. There's for your other dog who has reflux,
Yes.
I wouldn't be recommending the same probiotic as I would for this dog. So they would be two very different probiotics that would do two very different things within the body and that come from two very different strains. One would be yeast-based, one would be a lactic acid-based probiotic. So we do need to think that because not every probiotic operates in the same way.
Yep.
But if we do find a, lactic acid-based or canine-specific probiotic that is working for him, then it's a good idea to rotate through because the strength in the gut comes from microbial diversity. And even if we are trying to increase that diversity through a probiotic, we can end up decreasing it again if we're overfeeding the same probiotic because then we're just populating it with that 1-9 set of strains instead of a actual variety of strains. So that's in like a digestive supplement sense. But there's definitely some foods that you can be adding that can really help his body. I'd say a small amount, and I probably wouldn't do this while he's on dry food. It would be added to the BARF, a small amount of psyllium husk. Now, psyllium has been shown for dogs that have, I guess, again, the opposite sort of problem. If they have a digestive disorder where they've got constant diarrhea, psyllium has been shown to influence the gut microbiome in a positive way to an extent where they don't need to be on constant rounds of antibiotics anymore. So it's going to be useful for him as well
Mm.
because it's going to help nurture. So we're not thinking about it as a fiber to help him go to the bathroom. We're thinking of it as a means of nurturing and nourishing the microbiome. Slippery elm is a powder that you can find at some bulk food stores, and sometimes you can buy it online. You can probably get it from your local health food shop. Is a powder that also, will help nourish and nurture the microbiome while coating and soothing the digestive system and promoting motility. So these are a couple, I guess you could put them in the ballpark of superfoods, but they're really just prebiotic fibers that we can look at adding to a diet that has moisture in it because they're dry and they absorb a lot of moisture. If we're giving him dry food and these as well, then it's going to be too dehydrating on the body.
Mm.
Things like pumpkin and sweet potato would be really beautiful, lovely prebiotic additions to be adding to his diet that are tasty and, they're full of all these beautiful fresh nutrients as well. Obviously steamed and well cooked. We don't need to be giving it to him raw. That's not beneficial. His gut isn't really designed to be digesting things like plant material in that heavy sense. So we want to be preparing it for him. And for his like hips and things like that, we can look at green lit mussel, whether that be a powder or an extract. It's entirely up to you, or fresh mussels, whatever works for you and for him. And also a deer antler velvet as well can also be very helpful for joints and reducing inflammation within the body. So that would probably be the sort of path that I would be looking at in a general sense. The food, you could probably feed more than just chicken, and you might get benefit from feeding more than just chicken, but I would move very slowly. Very, very slowly. Turkey is, I'd argue, more nutritionally dense than chicken, but it still is quite gentle. And then you can move slowly into other things, maybe pork, maybe fish, maybe rabbit, and then slowly venture over to beef and those types of things and see what works well with him and maybe what he's still reacting to, considering that we're nurturing his microbiome simultaneously.
Awesome. That is incredible. I'm I'm looking forward to giving it a go and seeing how he goes. So he's such a good boy. He'll eat anything. He's just really is not that much of a trouble when it comes to food and things. But I'm so worried at times that we give him something that'll upset his tummy and then make him constipated. I'm like, oh, that would be awful. And then, of course, I actually have to then do the extraction process, which is
Yeah.
not nice for anyone.
No.
Absolutely not. But now Rosie's quite interesting because she has reflux, which took us months after she come to live with us to figure out what it was. And we were able to manage it for a while with lifestyle changes and diet. But now that she's 12, she's on Loscum, which is basically a human drug for reflux. So she has that every day, and she has basically a similar diet to Kenji, but for different reasons, obviously, to try and sort of keep her tummy as settled as possible throughout the day. So you were saying before that you would give her different probiotics. So, and this is where it gets really interesting because basically they both kind of need the same thing, but for very different reasons.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I guess I'd probably start by saying I'm not a veterinarian. I have
Yep, absolutely.
studied alongside veterinarians
Mm.
in some of my courses, but that doesn't make me a veterinarian. And I don't really know what has caused her reflux. I don't have that diagnosis, but I can give you some general information around what can cause reflux in dogs that is often, I guess, dismissed and people aren't aware of. And that if we can look at working with the dog with that in mind, then we might be able to find some success. So there's something that dogs can get regardless of what diet they're on called SIBO. People can get it too, which stands for small intestine microbial overgrowth. So now this is basically good or bad bacteria in the small intestine that shouldn't be there in high levels. And symptoms of this can include reflux, as well as other things, excessive burping, flatulence, and it's a digestive disorder. So it means that the food that is going into the stomach isn't being digested correctly. And that might be because the stomach has a high pH. High pH meaning it's not acidic enough. It's too basic. And because it's got a high pH, the food that's coming through isn't being correctly digested, and then it's being fermented in the small intestine. This fermentation promotes the growth of good and or bad bacteria in a space that they shouldn't be in. We shouldn't have fermentation happening in the small intestine. We should have nutrient uptake happening. So because we've got this fermentation process happening, we then get other impacts occurring from that. That can be reflux, it can be a production of gas, those types of things. Now, it might even be like a high fat thing. Sometimes if you eat fat and spicy food, you can get reflux. It could be a number of things, but I guess if we look at it from the potential that it could be this lack of digestion occurring and an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, then we would consider again using a digestive enzyme. So like you said, we can use similar things for both dogs, but for different reasons. A digestive enzyme, especially if we are feeding raw food, I would probably look at maybe cooking the food and leaning towards easy to digest nutrients. So if we're giving her a lot of broccoli, we maybe want to lean away from like the high roughage green vegetables and maybe lean more towards pumpkin, cooked and cooled like boiled rice, but only in very, very small quantities because these are foods that feed the microbiome and we don't really need to be feeding it because there's a lot there. We
Yep.
want to sort of be reducing it and coming down, if that sort of makes sense. If we start giving her a lactic acid-based probiotic, we're going to make the problem worse. She's going to get more reflux. She's going to be burping more. Does that make sense? Because
Yes.
we're giving her more bacteria where there's already too much.
Yeah.
So we don't want to be doing that. There is yeast-based probiotic that comes in both dog varieties and not dog varieties, but it's branded for dogs and there's branded for humans as well, called
Yep.
Saccharomyces boulardii. And Saccharomyces boulardii is going to be beneficial for a dog that has small intestinal microbial overgrowth because basically what it does is if you think of your gut as a city and there's, all these microbes overpopulating the space that necessarily shouldn't be, Saccharomyces boulardii sort of paves this foundation to even things out. So if there's, fungal microbes that shouldn't be there, it makes it it's like the police. It makes it a
Corrals
environment.
everyone in.
If there's too many people, it kind of, is
Disperses.
yeah. So it helps create this nice foundation for a healthy gut microbiome rather than a unhealthy, chaotic, overgrown sort of system. So I would probably be looking at that. Now, the thing with Saccharomyces boulardii, and this is why it wouldn't work for Kenji, is because it can cause constipation. Now, if he's already leaning towards constipation, we don't want to
Mm,
be using that.
yes.
We want to be using something that increases intestinal motility, not slows it down further. So Saccharomyces boulardii is probably something that I would be looking at adding for her. Cooked foods, reducing the prebiotic component. So for Kenji, we were increasing it. For her, we want to be decreasing it.
Mm.
And looking at things that are easy to digest and probably steering away from excessive amounts of fat until we can kind of get her body back into gear with digesting and uptaking nutrients in the correct way. But that's me without going in and looking at it to what the reason
Mm.
is. It might be a sphincter weakness. And if it's a sphincter weakness, then this isn't necessarily going to be the resolution to the problem. So, there's multiple medical reasons as to why something can happen. And reflux can be very distressing for a dog. It's not,
Mm.
a simple small, like, oh, it's just reflux. Like, it can be a very huge medical issue. And I've worked with dog owners before where they haven't been able to resolve it and they ended up putting their dog down because it was so severe.
Ah.
So, it is something that is a big problem and it is a medical issue, but we can look at what might the underlying issue be and see if we can work therapeutically through the diet within that realm.
Mhm. No, that is incredible. Thank you so much. Like it's great to see the application of the knowledge in a couple of examples. So, and Rosie, she, as I was saying before, we hit record when she first come to us. She was vomiting through her nose every couple of days, and it was very distressful for her and for us. So we were really glad that we kind of at least figured out what it was and we could give her some medication, but she still does it every now and again. So the medication can only go so far, and we definitely think it's diet because we've done everything else. So it's great to hear that there's probably things that we can still be doing to make her pug life even more luxurious than it already is.
And I think you mentioned to me earlier that you feed her smaller meals, and those types of things are really
Mm.
ticking off boxes. Like the smaller, easy to digest, more frequent meals, being mindful of exercise so that her body can just focus on digestion, not move from, eating to then exercising, and also making sure she eats that little bit slower. So then, again, like
Yes, it
just assist
does.
the
Yeah.
digestive process. These things are all also, of course, very beneficial.
Oh, no. Thank you so much, Jackie, for coming on the show. And my God, it was an incredible deep dive, and I have learned so much. So I'm sure my listeners are going, "Oh my God, I need to speak to Jackie. I definitely need her to get to look at my pug." So how do we find you? How do we get your pearls of wisdom in a more pug focused way?
If you, I guess, want to learn about things in general, I write a lot of blog posts through my Facebook page, Functional Canine. You can learn a lot there, and I've written about SIBO and those types of things. It's not necessarily pug focused, but a lot of the things I write about will be generalized to most dogs. So you can learn a lot through there. If you want to find out about the things that I do and I guess what I work with specifically, you can Google search Functional Canine or my branding Intuitive Healing Hub and follow the website through there, and you can see the different things that I work with. And yeah, I'm always happy to have a chat because not everyone is appropriate for working with me. There's only so far that I can go with the knowledge that I have with diet. And obviously, like I've been doing this for almost 10 years. So I do know quite a reasonable amount, but it doesn't mean that everybody is right for me. And it doesn't mean that I am right for your dog. And the things that we can discuss and do might only go so far. So I do free 15-minute discovery calls. I'm happy for you to send me an email and ask me some questions. These things aren't really an issue. And as you mentioned before, the booklet that's attached in the show notes, I offer for free on my website. There's just a couple little free downloads that might be able to educate and expand your knowledge just that little bit more on a few things that could be beneficial for your dog.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jackie. I do know that I need to book in a more detailed conversation with you about Rosie and Kenji. And the plan is to implement these changes and then check in with everyone in a couple of months' time and see how things are progressing with the rat bags. So I am very much looking forward to seeing how they're going. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Donna.
Wow. What an eye-opening, or should I say tummy-opening conversation. I hope it's given you some new ideas and a little confidence when it comes to filling your pug's bowl with food that not only fills their bellies, but supports their health too. Whether you're dealing with reflux like Rosie, sensitive tummies like Kenji, or just want to make sure your puggy is thriving from the inside out, remember, small changes can make a big difference and you don't have to break the bank to do it. It's not about being perfect. It's about being informed and doing your best for your little squishy face love of your life. And don't forget, I'm going to try out Jackie's recommendations for Rosie and Kenji and report back to you in a couple of months on our Facebook group page, the Pug Life Show podcast, so you can see how we went. Oh, help me. But if you have any further questions for Jackie or just want to share any aha moments from the episode now, pop over there and share away. Plus, if you haven't already, please follow the podcast so you don't miss out on the next episode. And while you're at it, leave us a review. It only takes a couple of seconds to give us a 5-star review, and it goes a long way to helping other pug parents find us. Rosie, Kenji, Buster, and I hope that you will join us again soon. But until then, have a pawsome week, and humans, be generous with the snackies.